This one is dedicated to each and every one of you who appreciate a great glass of wine. You know what I mean?
It's Monday. Let's raise a glass to the beginning of another week. It's time to unscrew, uncork, or saber a bottle. And let's begin exploring the wine glass. Today's episode is taking us deep into the heart of France to a region that's often misunderstood, occasionally underestimated, but absolutely unforgettable. Yes, we're diving into Beaujolais. I recently attended an incredible seminar in Los Angeles that focused on the geology of Beaujolais, and let me tell you, it was next level nerdy and in the best way possible. We're talking over 300 different soil types identified across the region. Yes, 300. And if you think that's wild, just wait until you hear those soils express themselves in the glass. We tasted through 9 wines, 3 wines each from 3 distinct soils. Yeah, it would be a hell of a seminar if we got to taste all 300, but the differences were mind-blowing. This is the kind of wine geekery that's so fascinating it becomes borderline addictive. Trust me, you'll never look Gamay the same way again. I've broken the seminar down into 2 parts because, well, the terroir talk is just that juicy. So settle in for part 1 and don't forget to come back for the final hour in part 2. We've only scratched the granite-rich surface. While you're listening, it would be greatly appreciated if you could take 1 minute to subscribe, rate, and review. It takes only a few seconds of your time, but means so much to the show. Also, please be sure to check the box for automatic downloads so that new episodes of Exploring the Wine Glass show up in your next up feed. The next best way to support Exploring the Wine Glass is to tell your friends. If you enjoy the podcast, your wine-loving friends will too. Follow me on all the socials, and finally, don't forget to head to the website exploringthewineglass.com to read the blog and sign up for the newsletter and keep up with all happenings. Slancha! Hey everybody, I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program, Spanish wine scholar, sommelier service, champagne and Côte d'Aron specialist, and a WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wine Glass on all the socials as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to swipe, subscribe, rate, and review. Stay in the know about all things wine by visiting my website, exploringthewineglass.com. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass.
Coming to this, I promise it's going to be a very, very special presentation. I know we have been absolutely enthralled to be involved with this campaign, to see Beaujolais through a different light that we previously haven't, to really delve into the soils, I think, in a way that we hadn't prior, and I think that's all going to unfold over the next couple of hours, and hopefully you enjoy it quite as much as we did, because we've learned quite a bit, and it's really, really a fascinating topic. I'll kick it off. My name is Greg Van Wagner. I'm based in Aspen, Colorado. I started Geo, which we're going to take you through today, and that's the lens that we're going to be showing Beaujolais soils through. Geo is kind of like a Google Earth for the wine world. I have an education platform that does all of like the hardcore education and then also the business side. In addition, I make a small amount of wine in Colorado in the Willamette Valley, and I've been a wine director for a while. And so we'll be taking you through. We have Guillaume.
Bonjour, I'm Guillaume Bisson. Pardon my French and my accent, but you're going to be a little bit in French with me. So I'm from the Southern Rhone Valley, from the Ardèche region. I've been a winemaker for 12 hours, and then I moved to South Worlds for North America for the Boisset family. Boisset family is a producer in origin in Burgundy and also in California, north of it. And so I work for them for North America, based in Montreal. So I'm gonna talk on behalf of the Montsan winery later during the tasting, and also on behalf of all the producers of Beaujolais.
A lot of people to talk for.
Yeah, a lot of pressure.
Hello everyone, I'm Joshua. My day job is with a wonderful company called Brabant Selections. I am Director of Education, and then I also manage sales here in Southern California. And I am happy to be up here because I think this is something that it's at least for me, very rare to be part of, I think, what is potentially kind of a hallmark point for our region in terms of what is going on with Beaujolais and what they've done. And we'll elaborate on that more, but from my geek inner heart piece of learning about wines, this is very cool. So I apologize if I get up on a soapbox and get super excited about things and start talking. Greg has to deflect things and keep me in check, but it's something that is very exciting for me, and so we're excited to share it with you guys. With the way the setup is going to be, you'll see on your sheet in front of you soil types, you'll see wines. We're going to go through it in 3 flights, okay? So you're going to have the flights set up based on soil type, and that's not something we often talk about with Beaujolais, so that's the whole ethos behind today's presentation based on data that's come out. And so we'll start with a couple of whites, which is a ton of fun because how much of Beaujolais is dominated by red?
About 96%.
Yeah, so 4% will be devoted to white, which is fun because we have 3 wines here, so that's about 3 of the 6 Chardonnays that get domestically imported. But what's nice too, speaking of that, is most of these wines, if not all of them, are available locally. We source locally, so when you get done with this and you have a couple of wines that blow your mind, you should be able to find them for all intents and purposes. It's not something that we had sent over from a winery that and brought over in a suitcase. It's something that you should be able to incorporate in your lives, whether that be on a restaurant program list or a retail shelf or in your home drinking it. All of those are certainly approved by us. As we go through, you'll see we'll progress from limestone to granite to pure blue. Please interrupt at any point. We are all about sharing our knowledge, but we like candid conversation. We like keeping it real, and rather than lecturing like a teacher, I would love to have questions. I would love to have comments. I know a good portion of you, and so it's fun to have engaging conversation. I know this community here in LA is very savvy, and so I really appreciate the solid showing here. It makes me very proud. And so thank you for that. But with that, I know we started in a very LA fashion, all completely on time, 25 minutes late. So we'll dive in. We have an amazing seminar in terms of the setup that Greg has incorporated with Geo, and the wines will get poured through it as we go. You'll see interruptions when they pour the wines, but hopefully that doesn't distract you too much. One of the wines in particular, we're going to pour fairly light on. I apologize for that, but it's something that, should you want more, it is available locally in some aspect, but I'll elaborate more on that. But it'll be the Morgon. It's going to be a little light, and I apologize, but that's just logistics and the fact that it's a Monday and rainy. So bear with us in that regard. But beyond that, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you all so much for taking the time to come out on a Monday, and let's talk some Beaujolais.
Absolutely. And to Josh's point too, instead of the old getting to the end and then asking, are there any questions? If there's something that piques your interest, let us know. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's keep it fluid. So this one, what comes to mind when you think of the region of Beaujolais? I think for everybody it's a little bit different. For myself, my first view into Beaujolais actually came as Cru Beaujolais as a sommelier. And for everybody, it wasn't necessarily the same. And I think the region is really in this inflection point where they're starting to see just what they can do with their wines, and they're making some of the best wines that they ever have. And so it's really exciting to see the region, see the younger generation of winemakers, see the traditional winemakers doing the best wines that they ever had, and seeing the region grow and change and adapt as we get into 2025. It's really fantastic.
Let's play the keyword game. What are some things that come to mind immediately? Your first, just throw them out there. Natural, perfect.
Earth.
Say again.
Earth.
Earth, carbonic, fresh. I like that.
Lights.
Light. Nouveau. Yes, thank you. These are all good things that we didn't touch on because these are all part of the fabric of the story of Beaujolais, and it's all part of where things have come about in terms of the recent years, and part of what hopefully I don't take too long talking to keep you guys late, but it's something that we'll elaborate. Other things for me when I was studying and prepping and ongoing studies, Beaujolais got simplified into the crus were granite and everything else was a little bit of limestone clay. And that was it. It was that simple. And there was some carbonic, and it got left at that. It was like, how do you memorize the crus? Okay, well, you didn't pay attention to north or south. You didn't pay attention to letters or arts. You just found some way to create a study method. And I'm glad to say that with this, it's nice to be able to see there's differentiation for reasons that has applied even to, we were talking earlier with a couple of guests from the media, that's applied even within the region to like a son who has now taken over winemaking from his father and from his grandfather. They've been like, no, that plot has always just been a little funky. Well, now thanks to soil studies and what have gone on, they have reasoning why that differentiates from the other 2 hectares that they farm as opposed to that 1 hectare. And that's really cool because it's a lens into terroir that has not been previously available for Beaujolais. And it gives Beaujolais a definition and a intensity to it that is likened to its neighbors in Burgundy and in the Rhone. And I think that's where we should put Beaujolais and not group it as like the little brother, which is something that has happened in the past.
Absolutely. So, geodiversity. This is something that, a lot of times as you're studying wine, you think of it in relation to Alsace. Alsace has done a fantastic job marketing that. Really just in recent years with the soil study, we had concrete data to show the geodiversity of Beaujolais. And that's something that hopefully we can get the word out today, but also as vignerons and farmers are seeing what plots are these different soil types, they're gaining a much deeper understanding into their own vineyards. So while today we're going to look at it through the lens of the 3 major soil types, so limestone, calcare, granite, and bluestone, the soil study found that there's actually over 300 unique soils within the region. And so we would be here, I think, until the next week or 2 if we went through all 300. But really, we want to hone in and view it through the lens of these 3 main soil types. And hopefully that we can start down that realm of seeing what all these different vineyards are, as opposed to, I hate to break it, it used to be as simple as say, oh, it's granite over there, and some limestone and some other stuff here. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but we won't get too far into the weeds with all 300. So we're looking at it through these lens of 3 really unique identifiable soils. So this is an interesting thing that I hadn't prior known existed. Josh and I were fortunate enough to go to the region last year on a 4.5-day intensive. It was my 3rd time to Beaujolais, and I never knew that most of this existed. So UNESCO Global Geopark. So you've all heard of UNESCO World Heritage Sites, things like this. A geopark is essentially an area that is celebrated for its geodiversity. But beyond that, you actually have to reapply every 4 years. And at first I thought that was funny. I was like, so they're rocks, how much do they change in 4 years? You're typically talking like hundreds of millions of years for this geologic change. But a lot of the beauty of this is that the geopark designation actually creates areas that you can interact with these soils. So for example, if you walk around Villefranche, there's actually a walking tour that you can take, that you can follow building to building, that you can see different fossils in the church, in the stones that make up these different buildings. Similarly, on the top of Mont Bruy, there's a geopark that allows you to walk around with giant examples of all the different types of rocks. And in addition, the reason you have to apply every 4 years, and it is so stringent, is because they want to make sure that you're taking care of the earth. You're not bulldozing areas, you're not scraping the earth clean, that you're doing the best farming and construction practices to keep the treasure that you have in the soil.
But it was interesting to see too in terms of the incorporations into, I guess, the broader aspect of tourism in the area. You go and you can go on, whether it's a winery-based visit and you're visiting wineries, or if you're just an outdoorsy person who want to go on hikes, they have hikes pre-set up that will take you through different pieces of geology, that will take you through different areas and highlight those things, as he said, within the Côte de Bruy, or even in like Chirouble, for example. You can go on these several kilometer long hikes that were really beautiful, and they have informative placards set up at each station talking about what led to that soil type, which is uber geeky on a level that I love. And so it was really fascinating to see the application of the broader geopark piece beyond just the wine world. And so it's something that, should you venture to Beaujolais, or to Lyon, want to go a little north, definitely look into that piece of it, because it can create a broader picture of the area and a better understanding, and also a better enjoyment of visiting that area than just going to say we're going and visiting a couple of producers and going to Julian and visiting a couple of producers and then ending up in a Bouchon in Lyon. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, the pass called Chemin Victor. Chemin Victor, you look on Google and you're going to find all the track you can follow and go to village. A lot of fun.
Yeah, you were saying there's one path that you can follow like down the entirety of the cruise, yeah? Which is pretty amazing. You can camp out and do it over the set of a couple of days. I think I was going to say, Greg, can you elaborate on the intensity with which the soil study was done? Because I think that's super important.
Oh, absolutely. So this was the most intense soil study that I've ever seen. So they did 15,000 different surveys, and the way that they did was every square kilometer they would take a full soil pit. So basically what that meant was taking a backhoe and going 15, 20 feet down, basically as far as you can imagine the root of a vine possibly making it. And doing that every square kilometer, and then every square hectare, they would take a soil auger and further delineate it. And then in between those, they would fill in the gaps based on topography and talking with local vignerons. And so what you have is 15,000 soil samples done over the size of Beaujolais, which is not huge. And it really created some of the most detailed soil maps I've ever seen of any wine region on the planet. And these are all available at the Beaujolais official website that you can download. They're free, they're super high detail, high resolution, and they go into great detail. And when I say that, all of these, there were so many soil samples just in the region the size of Beaujolais, it's easy to kind of forget the scale of things. Say, for example, Morgon is the second largest cru. Say, oh, second largest, well, that sounds big. Morgon is half the size of Oakville in Napa Valley. So just to put that in perspective, it's still a quite small region, and so to dial it into each of these soil types is incredible to see.
Question. This sounds really expensive. Who paid for all of this study?
My understanding was that it was the EU.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Was it one body that carried that out? Was it one organization?
Yeah, so it was a soil mapping company called Sigal, spelled like Sigalis, and they are specialists in this. I believe they've worked with other wine regions, but I haven't seen anything to this level. I'm a firm believer in aging Beaujolais. I've seen plenty of examples from 5 to 10 and even 15 and longer that are absolutely stunning. While in the region, Josh and I we got it as a blinder. It was a Beaujolais Village Nouveau in 2010, right?
No, I want to say it was like 04.
04, yeah.
I mean, it hadn't left the winery, right? So it was in perfect storage condition and probably been laid on its side from the second it was bottled. But Beaujolais Nouveau, Beaujolais Village Nouveau, from 04, and this was last year, so 20-year-old Beaujolais Nouveau. It was awesome. It was completely stunning. And so I'm going to chime in and piggyback on you with your question. I think Beaujolais is definitely age-worthy. Whether it's in the same capacity as, say, Barolo or Bordeaux remains in the eye of the beholder, but you also have to not look at it as just Beaujolais. I want to emphasize this to the group. Please look at it from the standpoint of Beaujolais AOP versus Beaujolais Village versus Morgon versus Moulin à Vent versus Chirouble versus Julian. A Morgon is going to age differently from a Chirouble. And then also, we geek out on this on other regions, a 21 is going to age differently from a 20, which is going to age differently from a 22. And so that's where it sounds daunting, but from my standpoint, I love cause and effect, and I love having reasoning for why things taste the way they do, and variance. I think there is no beverage on planet Earth besides wine that rewards curiosity in an infinite way that wine does. I love beer, I love spirits, don't get me wrong, but wine is just so unique in that regard. And so, yes, Beaujolais ages, and if you want to get it into a simplified form, I think if you like the very fruit-forward style, drink it in the first 5 years. If you want a little complexity, 5 to 10-ish, but it really varies, and it's like producer plays a role, vintage plays a role, much as we talk about Burgundy and Chambertin versus Les Amoureuses versus whatever, Les Saint-Georges and Robert Chevion versus Roumier. Like, those conversations are had in other regions. Why can't they be had in Beaujolais? sorry, you asked the question that I wanted to get up on my soapbox about, so hopefully gives you an idea. But today we're going to taste 4 vintages, which is awesome. You'll taste 20, 21, 22, and 23, which the only ones that have kind of some similarities are 20 and 22 for heat and drought. And so I encourage you to think about that as you go through. 21, more of a difficult vintage with frost and some coolness. 23, back to kind of classic Beaujolais. But as you taste through the wines, check that out and see where you think, because obviously 23 is going to have some baby fat, and 20 may not feel like it's as old as it is, whereas 21 may be a little more advanced. It's a fun kind of nebulous thing that I really enjoy personally. And so hopefully that gives you a little perspective on what you were looking for there in terms of that answer.
What I think with Beaujolais too is one of the things is that it has to do also with the availability of aged wines. There's less people that are just holding on to Beaujolais to sell as an investment, or big houses up on the hill that are stocking Beaujolais to age. So consequently, you simply don't see aged examples in the market as often. I've run wine programs where I was able to get some aged examples, and they've been absolutely stellar and fantastic. And if you do kind of scroll through the auction sites, occasionally you can find you can get some great finds, and because everybody else is going to different regions on some of these sites, I think if you go through like Hart Davis Hart or something, you can find some good, very well aged Beaujolais, and it'll definitely make an impression.
It's really dependent on the storage too. Like as you said, you tasted the Beaujolais Nouveau, who was aged in the same cellar as the producer for 20 years. It's obviously super. Obviously, it's going to show better than if you travel the whole world and if you've been into different cave and cellars from everybody. But yeah, I think to your answer, like yes, you should age Beaujolais, and that's why I always recommend buy a case. That way you can try every 2-3 years wine bottles, and then when it's ready, you invite all your friends and you get a good party. But it's always important. All wines could age. And it's always a question of taste. Like, what do you like? Mushroom, sous-bois kind of flavor evolution, or you like primary fruit? And when you like primary fruit, it's better to drink the wine when it's young. When you like evolved fruit, like cooked fruit, a little bit more earthy note, or mushroom, this kind of flavor, or laser, sorry. And those flavors gonna come with the aging in most of those. So, but yes, as George will mention, like it's different between the fruit, the vintage, and everything. So that's why it's a little bit of a game. You have to kind of try, guess, with some people who have tasted, or the producer sometimes can give you good advice. But yeah, it's also a question of your taste. So sometimes it's hard to define if it's going to age well for you or for somebody else. You know what I mean? So,
Yes, sir.
Was that Nouveau aged in bottle or in barrel?
Bottle.
Bottle.
Yeah. Yeah, and we also had a bottle of early 80s Cote de Bruy too from another producer that said there. So we had some pretty phenomenal examples. But to Guillaume's point, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And so it very much varies on what you're looking for from a personal standpoint. Those are experiences I won't soon forget. But like if I'm just going to go to Hart Davis Hart, I'm going to be very conscientious of producer and their style, because if it veers toward one of the keywords that was thrown out was natural. There can be instances of bottle variation, there can be instances of volatility, so you have to be aware of that, cognizant of that in your mind, as opposed to a producer who maybe veers towards Burgundian techniques. So those are all things that can be frustrating, but also can add to the diversity and the experience of providing another different experience with wine. So it's a lot to take in, but hopefully it's what keeps you coming back for more. I don't know.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, I was always under the impression that the stylistic choice of Nouveau was to bring the wine onto the market by next year. So I think with that impression, you wouldn't think to age it, if I'm...
Yep. Okay, so the question was the stylistic approach or the stylistic attempt is for Nouveau is to get it on the market by the next year. And the ethos behind Nouveau, Beaujolais Nouveau, was to be the first wine to market from the vintage as quickly as possible. There's stories from the 70s of loading cases of wine onto American Airlines flights to land it in New York like a couple of weeks later to be literally the freshest and first wine to vintage. And Nouveau is a piece of Beaujolais history that's important. It's a piece of Beaujolais history that's put the wine on the map for a lot of people when you look at the broader spectrum of like the US market in general. But for what we're going to talk about today, we're going to focus more in on the appellations that are the cru appellations, whether it's Juliana, Morgon. So Beaujolais Nouveau, well, an integral piece of the history is just going to remain that. We're going to keep it as part of the history, and it's something that all too often that piece and even now the natural wine piece get Beaujolais grouped into one box in particular, when in reality that's only one small part, right? It would be like saying, I don't know, Dry Creek only makes Zinfandel, and that's the only style of wine they make there, period. Whereas there's actually a broader spectrum of wines made there. It just depends on what you're looking for. So yeah, Nouveau, the whole intent was get it there quick and cheap and make some money, and we'll deal with everything else later. And they're dealing with the repercussions of that because a lot of the world only knows Beaujolais Nouveau. And so that's something that they're digging out of, and that's kind of the hope of educating with this today.
This 2004 models was probably left over, forgotten in the cellar. That's where they open it. But the goal when you do Beaujolais Nouveau is just it's a fun tradition in our region, like to just have the first taste of the wine that you make during the year. That was the origin of the movement. Then it became very active. But it's low, small extraction, nothing.
Less and less every year. I can't remember the specifics.
It does make a somewhat significant.
How much percentage of the harvest is dedicated to Beaujolais Nouveau in its entirety versus Beaujolais, Beaujolais Village, and the crus and such?
It's smaller and smaller because it's getting very more and more local. It's so costly to ship it very quick to be released Thursday of the month of November. So even last year in the US it was very complicated to organize the shipments to be on time. So yeah, you see less and less, and it's still big in Japan. Like it's still big. I think the swim in the Beaujolais Nouveau, like they do a lot of fun stuff there. But yeah, it's getting more local.
Well, so the question was, it was a great marketing tactic. I don't know why you've given it up. With that, it grouped them into a singular spot of one style of wine at one price point. It's kind of like the Aussie conundrum with critter wines. Mm-hmm. And so it was something that was wildly successful in what it did, but it didn't typify the region in its entirety. And so they're trying to move beyond that to show maturity, to show diversity, to show complexity within their wines. And that involves Beaujolais Nouveau taking a step back and becoming a side piece within the group as opposed to the lead singer of the band.
Well, we're still drinking it and still doing it, but there's women.
But also, other regions started doing wines of the vintage, and so no longer was Beaujolais Nouveau the only wine of that year you could drink 2024 in 2024. And other regions started doing it, so the novelty wore off a bit as well.
Correct. Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. I think we're going to keep going forward, but I feel like there's one hand over here. Otherwise, we're going to keep moving. Let's keep going. And finally, we're getting wine in front of you guys. I'm starting to switch. There's thirsty people in here. Thank you to the team that's pouring the wine.
Perfect. So that's a great segue. Just one last thing on the soil type. So Beaujolais is officially also recognized as a heroic vineyard site, and so typically you see this label, and there's actually specific data that you need that apply to regions like Valpellina, Coroti, the Mosel, things like that. Beaujolais is indeed about 30% of the entire vineyard is on slopes over 30%. So it's a very, very steep vineyard, almost necessitating in most cases manual harvest, working by hand on very, very steep slopes. It's very, very easy to stay in shape in Beaujolais.
We'll talk about that more with the first flight of reds when we get into the different soil types.
Yeah, and so this, right, everything isn't just soil. It also has to do with the hand of the winemaker, the climate, the individual vintage. However, what we're starting to see over the time is that soil indeed does make an absolute impact, and you're starting to see a commonality and a through line that goes through wines, done by different winemakers, but on similar soil types. And so it's not everything, but it's a huge part of the component. Okay, I'm glad you had wine in your class. Now it's time to get into the geologic weeds. So we'll go through this a little bit. It's important to know if there's ever a topic that you just sit down and like you feel dumb studying, geology is 100% it, I think, for the entire world. It's such a detailed topic with just specific lingo and everything. So we're going to do kind of geology light. We're going to give you enough information to know how this happened, because it's important to know how these soils came about, without getting wildly into the weeds of hardcore level geology, because trust me, it's a wild world out there. So more or less, the areas that we're looking at.
Are there slides available after this?
They will be. Yes. So more or less, as the plate tectonics, as the land masses of the prehistoric world were moving around, the area that is Beaujolais now went through several phases of being underwater, being on top of mountains, being pulled apart, being smushed back together, and then being underwater again, and then finally to where it is nowadays. And so each of those time frames created a different type of rock. In geology, you typically talk about the geologic age. And in Beaujolais' history, it starts about 500 million years ago. This is when things like gneiss and schist were formed. Blue rock, which is one of the main soil components that we're going to go into, this was formed about 400 million years ago. Now, both blue rock and granite, they both come from magma, basically. So they're both igneous rocks. Blue stones, they were formed underwater when Beaujolais was in basically an underwater oceanic rift. And because of that, when they came up, they hit the water and they cooled very, very fast, and they cooled really, really, really dense. Now the granites, when those came up, those were above the water at a time when Beaujolais was not underwater. And so when they came up, they came out into the air, therefore they cooled slower and created a different structure, something a little bit more friable, something a little more breakable than the hard, compact blue stone. So as we go throughout the years, you get into a spot where Beaujolais is now starting to be back under a prehistoric sea, and this is where you get all of your calcareous limestone-based soils. So between fossils, sedimentation, all of these things that bring carbonates back to the earth, that's when those all formed.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Did you know that Dracaena Wines has a wine club? We named it the Chalk Club. Draco is on our label, but Vegas was getting a bit jealous, so we decided he deserved to be our wine club spokesdog. In Las Vegas, betting chalk means that you are betting on all of the favorites, and we're gambling that once you taste our wines, we will become one of your favorite wineries. The club is simple, yet a bit different than most. We don't ask for a lot of commitment like others do. Choose between 3 tiers, the Sweet 16, where you will receive 3 bottles twice a year and get 15% off all orders. Sign up for the Elite 8 and get 20% off all orders and receive 4 bottles twice a year, or make it to the Final 4 and receive 6 bottles twice a year, as well as receiving 25% off purchases. All tiers receive discounted shipping, are customizable, and are eligible for unlimited referral bonuses. Add $15 to the bank for each person you refer. Head to www.dracaenawines.com to use the link in the show notes to find out all the Chalk Club has to offer and to sign up. We've stocked the odds so that you can get our award-winning wines without breaking the bank.
Now, as we get into a little bit more modern times, the water started to recede. So now, you have all of these different components that are on the area that Beaujolais is. However, a really key point is that during the last major ice age, Beaujolais was literally within 10 or 15 kilometers of where the edge of the glaciers were. And because it wasn't covered by glaciers, it actually managed to retain all of these rocks and soils. Whereas if that area had been glaciated, it would have all been pushed off as the glaciers receded. Does that make sense? So Beaujolais was actually able to keep all of these different rocks that otherwise, had it been glaciated, would have gone away. All right, so this is like a visual presentation to see the main soil types as we go through the geologic age. Okay.
Sorry, it sounded like you said glaciated a number of times. Is that for a purpose and reason to differentiate to maybe a neighboring region of note?
Not necessarily to differentiate it, but it is one reason that a lot of these rocks that are 300 million years ago, 400 million years ago, had the area been glaciated, it would have had a tendency to push everything away or to different areas. So I don't think it's the entirety of why the Beaujolais still has this diversity, but the Earth would certainly look different had it been. So yeah, this is, when we talk about bluestone, literally this is a perfect picture of it, because you look at these hillsides and they are blue. You look at the granite hillsides and they are this like glowing red. You look at Pierre Duret and it is this like yellow, like goldish kind of hue. So you can really see these represented in the vineyards. This is a great representation of granite. This piece is an intact piece of granite, but when you're in the region, you'll see different variations where it's starting to kind of pull apart and can create a more soil-like structure. So it's not all just like your kitchen counter. A lot of it's that more kind of friable, pulled apart where the vines can get through. So we have quartz and golden rock. So golden rock, you'll hear various terms that we apply to it. Just keep in mind that these are calcareous limestone-based soils. So the exact composition of marls within limestone, they all make up this overarching soil group that we refer to as golden rock. And you'll hear us refer to it as Pierre Duret later. All right, so we're going to look at Beaujolais through the soils, the main lens of 3 different soils. There are also, once you get closer to the Saône River Valley, there are alluvial and colluvial soils. But out of all the 300 soils, we're going to look at it through the lens of these 3, and they show this fantastic through line and continuality of flavor. All right, so I know this is nobody's first introduction to Beaujolais, but we're just going to give a brief overall, just so you can get yourself oriented in the world. This is more or less the overarching soil map of Beaujolais. So you have the Beaujolais Mountains here, you have the Saône River right here. This area in here where you see these kind of lightish grays, that's alluvial and colluvial soils. As you get into the hillsides, there is truth in that. There is much more granite in the western hillsides. And then you have these veins of bluestone that go throughout the appellation and are really, really high intensities in certain appellations that we'll see later. And then in the south, it is very true, there is a higher propensity of limestone soils. But it's important to note that there's streaks of these different soils that go throughout the appellations. So I find it good to get oriented from where we are to start. So you can kind of see where we are and where we're going to in France. So we're in LA very specifically. We are right here in West Hollywood. Actually, literally right there. But we're going over to France, specifically Beaujolais. So Beaujolais, going from Burgundy south, Côte Chalonnais, Mâconnais, Beaujolais, again, right here, you have the city of Lyon, which is going to be your hopping off point for any great trip around Beaujolais. I highly recommend it. It's an absolutely fantastic city, worthy of a trip in and of itself, and you get the benefit of being so close to Beaujolais. And you can even double it up. You're also equally close to the Northern Rhone. So I highly suggest making a full trip out of it. This shot is just of the Beaujolais vineyard. It's just an absolutely stunning zone. Really, really is incredible natural beauty. Where there's natural beauty in vines and can make fantastic wines, there is certainly a lot of truth in that. So now we get in, this again, just a general overview. We have Beaujolais AOP, that's through the south, and then also up the eastern flank. You have the 10 northern crus, and then Beaujolais Village, which more or less forms a ring around the northern crus. So as we get in, this is just a quick reference to with your 10 northern crus. We'll go into the different ones in a little bit more depth, but this is so you can kind of get the lay of the land. I always like to look at Côte Bruy because it's kind of dominating on the landscape. You can kind of get a reference for wherever you are. And going up into Saint Amour. So Saint Amour, we don't have one today, but they're producing some incredible wines. The reason we're highlighting it here is because Saint Amour very easily showcases all these different soil types, like all of the major types, just in one appellation. So throughout this presentation, you'll see always these granites. They're going to be variations of red, right? Red, orange, and that's based on how decomposed they are, what type of granite. But granites are always going to be kind of orange reddish. The bluestones will always be blue and green, depending on how decomposed they are. Limestones and marls, they're always going to be this kind of yellow color. Again, these golden rocks. And then alluvials and colluvials are going to be kind of this tan, beige type color. So these are a little bit more into the soil types themselves. Again, not all granite is created the same. Some are deep, some are shallow, some are very, very decomposed so that you can actually run your hand through them and it's just flakes of granite. And some are just like a kitchen countertop. They're rock hard, they're not going anywhere. And so this is showing the difference between those. Same thing with blue rock, right? There's blue rock that's just absolutely all together, it's not altered at all, and others that are more broken down, decomposed, and altered. And then same thing with your category of, all right, so overarching view of Beaujolais yet again. So we're gonna talk a little bit about Beaujolais Village. We have two Beaujolais Blanc and a Beaujolais Village. Beaujolais Village is interesting as more or less it kind of encircles the northern crus, but also there's a couple Beaujolais Village that I think in the future, and we're talking 15, 20 years, because the French system moves slow, which is great because it's not the Italian system where they'll give the OCG to anybody. But I think in 15 or 20 years, I think there's a couple Beaujolais Village that you're actually going to see promoted to cru status.
Well, to chime in there, can you go back one? Sorry, wait on that. But I think it's important to note that, as Greg said with Beaujolais Village, it is kind of an umbrella enveloping the crus. And so you see here with the statistics that it's a primarily granitic setup in terms of the soils. And so it's a one that when you find a producer that you like, if they make a Beaujolais Village, that's probably a little bit of a diamond in the rough kind of treasure trove wine where you can find something for very BTGable, very Tuesday night, you've had a rough day at work kind of wine that is something that if you didn't know that Beaujolais Village was grouped into that area with the crus, you may just assume, that's kind of just an everyday wine. But in reality, when you see that Village piece accoladed onto the end of it, you're in a much more concise area that is surrounding the crus that is heavily reliant on granite. And Gamay tends to do very well on granite. So that's something I like to point out in terms of Beaujolais Village versus the Beaujolais AOP in itself, in its broader entirety.
Absolutely. And this is it visually. Again, this area in the center, that's the northern crus. You have the Mont Bruy just here. And so forming an envelope around with lots of granite, lots of bluestone, and making absolutely fantastic wines. So one of the villages that could potentially work on the cru status over the next decade or two, Lancier. This is, we've tasted through a bunch of these wines. They're absolutely fantastic. But as you see a little bit more on this eastern side, you do have a little more alluvial and colluvial, but with granite on the west. Comparing that to another village that I think in the future could also see cru status, Lantenier, that's all the way up in the western foothills, which is almost entirely granite with these cores of bluestone going throughout. So as we get into limestone, we start the flight off with 3 whites. As you all know, Chardonnay loves limestone. It's great. Sometimes being solemn is really, really easy. Chardonnay loves limestone. Great. Perfect.
Well, that's a good picture. That's an example of Pierre Doré, or the Southern Beaujolais in particular. And when we talk about Pierre Doré, we'll elaborate a little bit on, there's a group of producers that have gotten together to form, I guess, a body to promote wines from Beaujolais that they've named it Pierre Doré. So that can get confusing because not only is it a soil type, but it's also a group of producers promoting higher quality in the better Beaujolais appellation. Not all wines from Pierre Doré are grown on Pierre Doré soils. Okay? So hopefully that's not super confusing. But what's interesting is Southern Beaujolais, this stone is really prevalent and they use it in quarries, and so you see buildings, whether there's small towns that are all entirely of this golden limestone, or whether you're walking around Villefranche and a certain building sticks out, it's a piece of soil that has been used a lot in the infrastructure of the area, and it's given the area a likeness to, they call it the Tuscany of Beaujolais, or the Tuscany of France, because the afternoon sun and the way it hits this golden rock kind of gives that setting you feel in like a Provence or in Tuscany, and it's one of the more beautifully, visually stunning areas to drive through in that section of France. And so obviously you see the quarries here where they have stones that, I mean, it was just massive. You can see the fence at the bottom when you have to walk through here, and they had buildings surrounding the area. A little small town next to it was all built out of Pierre Doré, the goldstone, and it's something that is very, very tightly knit into the fabric of the region. And so be aware of that, because the producers that are putting together the Pierre Doré certification or stamp are pushing for it, and as Greg said, it may take 2 decades to get there, but they're trying to promote that and using that as their way to champion it as a piece of the history of the area.
Cool. So that's in the quarry. This is what it looks like in the vineyard.
In the 3 glasses in front of you, you have, the first wine is a 2023. It is, all 3 are Chardonnay. And yes, sir. They're all 3 Chardonnay. 2 are from the area of where most of the Pierre Doré is concentrated in southern Beaujolais, near a town called Bois de Wont. Wont is a fun word to say. It's O-I-N-G-T. And it is between the 3 wines. Yep. So the first one is going to be done in stainless steel with a little bit of lees contact, so bright, fresh. The mineral expression to it, to me, almost has a slight Parmesan-y character that reminds me of Chablis a little bit, but with a little more yellow fruit, but really bright and fresh. Wine number 2 is actually from Beaujolais Village. So we've moved up north into the Cru area. It's from an area that used to be in Fleury. And so the soils, while they do have limestone, it's not as heavily present as in the south with the Pierre Doré. So it's a marl with limestone present. So you see a little different fruit expression here. You see a little broader texture. You might see some peach tones as opposed to just citrus and apples and pears. And then the third wine is, one of these is not like the others in terms of picking that glass up. That is one producer from the area where the Pierre Doré producers are located. It's the top-end Chardonnay. So it's a selection of 3 barrels, and it's spent 24 months in oak. A portion of it is new, and it is 2022, so it's still quite a baby, but it is a full-blown oaky-style Chardonnay that it has a lot more structure going on in intensity compared to the other 2 that are a little more zesty, zingy, zippy, vibrant Chardonnay.
The second wine.
Swirling the line
Absolutely. So there's 2 thoughts here, or there's many thoughts. There's 2 that I think of in terms of, you can take the glass and agitate it a little bit and get some of the subtler aromatics, and then when you actually swirl it, you're going to get some of the stronger aromatics and esters to come out that are more the fruit forward tones. So I would encourage you to do both. Like if you're just picking up this glass after it hasn't been disturbed, nudge it a little bit. Smell that, to me, gives me some of the floral tones and the nutty tones, and then when I swirl it, I get more of the apples, the yellow apples, the green apple skin, the faint hint of like a marshmallow yogurty kind of character with the leaves. And so there's 2 ways to go about that. So, but definitely swirling it will help it make the aromatics stronger. And then actually, no, we already talked about the third wine, Dorado Peru. And what I thought was interesting is I didn't get a look at this label. Gennaro, the third wine, is it labeled Beaujolais Blanc? Okay, because he has another one, not the Trois Pièces. This is a selection of 3 barrels, but he actually labels it Bourgogne Blanc, which is interesting because technically Beaujolais is part of Burgundy, right? In terms of the way the government looks at it, it's kind of funny because it's not. Like, you look at part of, like, go to Fleury or Chirouble, and technically you have the Loire converging with the Rhone, with Burgundy, and so it's kind of lost in the middle in more ways than one. But the producer actually labels the Chardonnay below this as Bourgogne Blanc because they can, because it's within the umbrella of the broader Bourgogne appellation. But would you know that if you didn't pay attention? No. So that's kind of the funny piece of appellations and where and how you can get away with things if somebody's not paying attention. But I'm glad to see that the Trois Pièces, the top end Chardonnay, is labeled as Beaujolais Blanc, because we want to give credit where Beaujolais deserves credit for some damn good Chardonnay.
And that's why Beaujolais Blanc it's fairly new in terms of AOC, because producers are more and more proud of, replicating the name Beaujolais Blanc instead of going to Bourgogne Blanc, and that's also why we see that more on the shelf. White is more trendy, but also the producers are more proud of talking about Beaujolais than labeling Red Burgundy or Grand Bourgogne.
What's the aging on the second one? You said stainless steel 3 years. What's this one?
The Johann Lardy is a combination of cement tank and barrel. It's only like 6 months, so not much. And it's very hands-off. It's not 0 in, 0 out, but it's pretty darn close in terms of veering towards the natural piece of things. And so it's a fun mix of Chardonnays in terms of the style. Greg and I have talked about it a lot. I think Beaujolais represents great value in terms of if you work in a restaurant and are looking for Chardonnay by the glass. I think Beaujolais presents some opportunities there, and that it still can hit price points that make sense for that. And it pays to find producers that you like and continue to seek them out, find importers that you like and continue to seek them out, because as we talked about, it's 96% Gamay and 4% Chardonnay. I'll get you, give me 1 second, Mr. Gentleman, back to the question. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yes, what's the price point to the first one? Feels like steel in percentage-wise compared to Chardonnay entry level.
Price points, we can get those for you off the top of my head. I wouldn't know those, I would be guessing. And so I will find out for you and come back to you once we have a break between one of the 2 next flights and get back to you. So I apologize, I don't know that. And let's go.
Yeah, so it's obvious quite a bit of style differentiation here, soil differentiation, at least between the middle and the other 2. What about tonal diversity?
In terms of Chardonnay, I can't elaborate on that because I'm not super sure. Guillaume, do you know, is there a preference in terms of Chardonnay tonal material on there?
It smells beautiful.
To answer that question, can dig a little bit, but no, I don't have that on top of my mind. But I can say to Chardonnay, because you mentioned that back in Burgundy, because Chardonnay is from Macron Chardonnay.
Yeah, usually they're more like these guys.
That's really closer than Beaujolais than Bâtard Montrachet and the others. So in terms of distance, so Chardonnay always have been planted in Beaujolais and obviously in Great Burgundy. But so that's why when we talk about Great Burgundy, Beaujolais is included because it's the original Chardonnay is 10 kilometers north of I guess Saint-Amand or Beaujolais Lantigny.
Yeah, but I apologize if we don't have more specifics on
for the clone, all the with.
We'll get pricing for you as we go through. I don't have that available. Oh man, I wouldn't dare to guess because I'll be off. I mean, you could let me look on Vino. I'll get back to your pricing.
It's hard to guess. Basically, there's 2 things usually, like Beaujolais, around 20, 30 kind of environment and up, based on the quantity and the availability. So yeah. But, I don't know the conditions. So they could be 50.
Yeah.
Do you find demand for Chardonnay? I think there's demand for good Chardonnay. Oh yeah, there's great Chardonnay in Australia.
So classic.
And so that's where, in terms of like stepping away from the Beaujolais Blanc piece and just looking at well-made Chardonnay, whether it's Anderson Valley or Molinarda in South Africa, if it's good Chardonnay, it's good Chardonnay, and it's worth your time. And so that's sometimes when I think about things, how I pitch it rather than Beaujolais Blanc. I'm guessing the first two are more affordable and the second one is a little more expensive just because it's spent 24 months in some amount of new oak. Usually that equates to a little more cost in terms of the goods, but I don't know off the top of my head. So I'll find out later.
Has the middle one at $24 retail.
$24 for the middle one?
24 retail.
That's kind of where I would have guessed. And the first one I would guess around that, maybe a touch less expensive, but it's super tasty. And the third I would guess a tier above that based on the profile of the wood. So the comment was $24 for the middle one is the retail.
Cool. And they're always delicious. I mean, I don't know about for any of you, but I had not prior tasted really that many Beaujolais Blanc. I think they deserve their time in the spotlight because again, they're, to Josh's point, they're really well-made Chardonnay coming from great terroir. Again, because it's only 4% of the vineyard area, you just don't see it as much. But I don't know. I'd recommend searching some out if you see some in a distributor's portfolio. Maybe have them pop a bottle because they might not think to throw it in the bag, but there's really an amazing amount of great Chardonnay and Beaujolais.
Thank you for all the great questions. I appreciate the commentary. Sorry we don't have the answers to everything. Yes, sir.
So what about aligoté?
You know, that's a good question. I got asked by somebody about why don't they make more Gamay in a white wine profile. I think aligoté would kind of fit in that same map in that it has its places a little bit north of there. You also have a little bit of the rift between the younger brother being Beaujolais and the older brother being Burgundy, that they're willing to take on Chardonnay, but aligoté might be too tall of a task in terms of asking. But who knows? I know there's a group of producers called Les Aligoteurs. Maybe they'll start extending into Beaujolais, but I've never had one. Has anybody in this room had an aligoté from anywhere outside of Bouzeron or the Côte d'Ivry and the Côte de Beaune? So I haven't seen a ton of aligoté.
I'm not sure it's part of the when you produce Beaujolais, you have to respect the cahier des charges from the university. I'm not sure aligoté is part of Beaujolais white university.
Well, that's what we'll get into this more later, but it's fun to play the game with Gamay from other places in terms of where it's being grown, whether it's Oregon or Monterey or whatnot. So I'll be curious to revisit that conversation. Let's talk vintages, shall we? So vintage variation is one of the things that adds to my argument in terms of the complexities of wine outdoing the likes of beer or spirits or whatever, because vintage is the ultimate card you can play to win the hand, in that it varies year to year. And Beaujolais is certainly a place where you need to pay attention to vintage. You look at the last 20, 25 years or so, and there's been a huge swing of vintages, whether hail has played a huge role, whether frost has played a huge role, whether drought has played a huge role. And you can look at that from the standpoint of positive, negative, or a 5-star versus a 2-star. I look at it as vintage variation, and I want to see what the producer is going to do with it. And I love that because it provides, it rewards my curiosity. And so that's why I'm happy that we have today 20, 21, 22, and 23, because it gives you a lens into different times in the area and a different space where that producer is at. So 20, obviously coming off the heels of 19, both warm vintages, both vintages where drought played a role with intense sunlight and intense heat. Find stress in that regard. What's interesting when you see these vintages, Greg and I have had the luck of doing this a couple of times to see different appellations and the different soil types and how they handle heat differently. There's a different water retention rate. Literally, they have stats for this. If you ask the people in their Beaujolais for bluestone versus granite versus alluvials and colluvials and the Piedmont soils versus limestone. And so Gamay grown on granite is going to weather drought differently from Gamay grown on Pierre Bleu, which is super interesting when you look at the standpoint of, like, we go back to the metaphor I was using with, hey, I'm making wine, my dad made it here, my grandpa made it here. My grandpa always said block A was a little screwy. I don't know why, but Block B and C always do well in these vintages. Well, it's probably because Block A was Pierre Bleu and granite is most of the rest of it. And now we have the soil study to know that, to support it. So they can now adjust their viticultural methods in terms of pruning, in terms of handling, just the overall lifespan of the vine in a much better, more efficient way than they would have before, because they have scientific evidence and results as to why. So it's another tool in the Beaujolais producers' bag of tools that they didn't have previously, where they maybe would have been likened to a rustic region with rustic producers. Well, now they have some of the winery tech that they need. Now they have hard, fast data as to why the soils react in which ways they do, and 20 is a factor of that. They were talking about, when we were there, starting to think about planting on northern-facing hillsides instead of just south and southeast-facing hillsides, because of 19 and 20 and 15 and 22, these vintages that are very solar vintages that are intense heat and put a lot of heat stress on the vines. And actually Pierre Bleu performs better than granite a little bit in terms of water retention. So it's just, it's fascinating to see that and then to be able to see it in the glass. And so hopefully we'll talk more about it. But that's 20 vintage, 21. You want to go on that one, or you want me to keep going on the soapbox?
I'm rolling.
All right. 21, other side of the spectrum, is a vintage that was hit at flowering with frost. So yields were limited. So bud break had started, they got hit with the frost. They had to wait, the year got extended out because they had to wait for another bud break, which they were able to get weather that was decent. So what was produced in 21, even though it had a tough year, there was low quantities, but the quality was great. So you'll see a vintage that was challenged by the weather that was presented to it, but at the same time, what was produced was really good. And so it's a unique vintage that I've really enjoyed, to be honest, because it's bookended by two blockbuster, right, broad shoulder vintages. And I, for whatever reason, whether I want to root for the underdog or I like a little pop of acid, I like 21s for the most part, so I'm excited to share a couple 21s with you. But don't pass on them just because, for whatever reason, it was said to be a vintage that was tricky. Play a producer, find producers you like, or producers that have a style that maybe you like, or a soil type in the theme with this seminar, and check them out, because vintage variation is fun. There was a question back here.
Yeah. So in my experience, I've tasted in 2020 and 21 and 22, between Morgon and Fleury, there was this switch in which Fleury all of a sudden started to have more body and more, it's like, I guess you can say, it elevated itself from the clean, a more feminine style Beaujolais, and Morgon started getting a lot lighter in this category. Do you think that a lot of this has to do in particular with the way that the soil types handle these different vintage variations? I think it was 2021. So I'm curious to see also if you've seen that switch yourself between Morgon and Fleury kind of.
Can I elaborate on that when we get to the Morgon?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay, cool. Just because I would love to, because I like to jump on my soapbox and stand up about Morgon, because it is, as Greg said, a huge appellation. It's the second biggest one in the region, and not huge. I mean, it's not that big. It's big in comparison to Beaujolais, but I mean, Chenas is like the size of this room. And so there's reasonings there, and that's part of the fun, kind of like, let's dive in with a more fine-tooth comb or lens. So I'll get to that when we get to Morgon. Cool? All right, great question, thank you.
This has been another episode
There is
of
always
Exploring the Wine
time.